It's the lecture 170 through 183, chapter 7. The central tenet of republicanism was that people were sovereign. If somebody's sovereign, you are doing it on your own without help from anybody else. This also includes the ability to tax and the ability to take a life. We talked about this prior with the uh, revolutionaries fighting taxation. A Republican also suggested that political rights should be limited to those who own property, because they think in order to be educated and be able to vote, you need to be economically self-sufficient. So that's going to eliminate a lot of people. Okay, so in order to vote, you have to have money. Republicanism limited political participation to adult propertied white men, and that's only about 60 to 85% of all white men. So we're not even talking about um, excluding women and African Americans. We're talking about excluding white men as well. The traditional patriarchal assumption that politics is a male domain did not change. Women are considered a dependent class. New Jersey offers women the right to vote, but then rescinds it in 1807, and women really and truly, and this time were not afforded the political quote unquote education. They weren't outside the home. So to be politically informed, it was not their fault, but they were not politically informed. Women did benefit slightly from less restrictive divorce laws, access to education and business, and a higher moral status, and women are held up to a higher esteem than they were previously. The revolution stimulated a growth of free black communities in the South, development of African American culture, but only 1 in 10 African Americans are freed or gain their freedom in the South. In the North, that's going to be different. The northern states gradually abolished slavery, usually by the generation method, where if you're a slave, you have children, your children are free. Of course, you are going to raise them. They will live as slaves, but then when they're old enough, they'll go on their own and they will work as freedmen and try to buy back their parents' freedom. Okay, we talked about Phyllis Wheatley, who was the Negro servant of John Wheatley of Boston. So yes, she was the Negro servant now. She's not a slave, but this man apparently cared for her in the fact that he would publish these papers, have her be educated, and things of that nature. Richard Allen was a former slave. He was either freed or bought his freedom. He purchased his freedom and then went about trying to free or purchase the freedom of other African Americans through the Free Africanist Society in Philadelphia. And then he became a bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Most Native Americans stayed neutral during the war. We talked about Native Americans fighting against fighting with the British against the Americans, but majority of them stayed neutral. But they wanted to free themselves from American domination. That's just not going to happen. They do see themselves now more as Native Americans than as Choctaw or Creek or things of that nature. They pool themselves in bigger group together. In the 1780s, imperial rivalries continued to allow Native Americans to play the United States and colonial powers off of each other. So they're just going to play one another off of each other because they're smart, because they can, because it's going to cause problems. And the funny thing is that they're just going to keep doing this, and deservedly so, rightfully so, which I think is really awesome. They're going to get taken advantage of, but they're going to try to take advantage of every situation humanly possible. The new state constitutions are in place by 1777. So every state has a constitution. It's a written document, and it curbs the powers of the governor and strengthens the state legislators. But the new state constitutions do, in fact, weaken the ties between church and state. They do not tie a specific state to a church. They tie what we will know as the freedom of religion. So they're going to support religion, but not support a specific denomination or a specific religion itself. Radicals and conservatives held a different view of republicanism. Radicals, they want to have everybody be able to vote, and conservatives want nobody to vote. I mean, it's so bad in South Carolina that only 10% of the white males have the ability to vote. So, I mean, that's not a democracy or republic, that's an aristocracy. But radicals ruled in Pennsylvania, where in Pennsylvania, all free males who paid taxes could vote. So again, it's kind of just it depends by the state and who's kind of in charge. Bill of Rights we'll talk about later. Articles of Confederation are what delegated the United States. It's what ruled the United States, but they have extremely limited powers. Okay, the only national authority is Congress. So you have state legislators, and then you have the Confederated Congress. And the problem with the Confederated Congress is they're so afraid of somebody gaining and becoming a tyrant like King George III, that they make it so the Congress is the sole national authority, and in doing so make sure that everything has to be unanimously voted into place. And these are the constitutional safeguards that make it impossible to threaten a state's interest. If a state doesn't like it, they vote against it. And I use the example of class of, your favorite drink or, your favorite chicken place. I mean, you get 12 people together, you're not going to make a unanimous vote. And that's on simple things like Coke or Pepsi or tea or juice or milk or, just Chick-fil-A or whatever, or Slims or, I mean, it's just insane that we can't decide on things and they're thinking that they can have a unanimous vote on things. Congress is the primary responsible for foreign policy and Western and national defense, which they can't come up on anything because it's not unanimous. States, once the American Revolution ends, they start just grabbing up Western lands. Well, then other states who didn't grab up those Western lands, like states not Virginia, not Massachusetts, not Connecticut, not Georgia, not Carolina, they're like, whoa, wait a second. We're not signing this Article of Confederation until it's taken care of. So they go back and they take care of the situation. They rescind those claims. Everybody gives back their claim to Western lands, and they move forward with the Articles of Confederation, and that's just open territory, which we'll talk next reading about how they handle those situations. Problems at home, the United States and the states incurred heavy debt during the Revolution. So we have this great plan to figure it out. Robert Morris goes, okay, we're going to organize this bank. It's going to be called the Bank of North America. It's going to hold all the government funds. It's going to make loans to our federal government. It's going to issue paper money. It's going to figure out things. But the only way that can happen is that Congress would have to assume the national debt. And the only way they'll assume the national debt is to be able to pay it off. And the only way they can pay it off is to have the power to tax. Okay? And so he proposes this constitutional amendment for a national tariff, but it fails. So we have no way of paying any kind of bills. And after the war, Britain keeps its market closed to American goods. So we're not making any money. They flood our markets with cheap goods to keep the United States weak and dependent. And they give us very cheap goods and allow us to pay in cash with the idea that, hey, we're going to make them pay in hard currency, in actual gold or silver. Okay? So their foreign loans are the only way for us to get hard currency, and that's coming from France and Spain. And Spain's really stingy about it, but France is helping us out. But having actual gold or silver to pay for the stuff we're getting from England is very difficult for us to come by. And we have a big problem. We have this big bubble of credit, and people are wanting the money. And so creditors are going to give it out at high rates, high interest rates, but eventually they're just not going to be able to pay it. And in 1784, the bubble bursts. Nobody's able to get credit. Nobody's able to pay off their debts. And for 6 years, we have a depression. It lasts all the way until 1790 because we can't figure out what's going on. It's going to take us coming up with another plan in order to fix our economic situation. I mean, this is just common sense. We have more, under mercantilism, we had more exports than imports. Britain did. Well, now as a country of our own, we're looking at it and we have way more imports than exports, so we're spending way more money than we're actually making. Well, that's not going to work for very long. We're going to be broke. Artisans, merchants, and workers push for tariffs against British goods to encourage domestic production. And northern states pass those tariffs. But there's no uniform national policy, so they're all ineffective because New York puts it at a 5% rate. Well, then Pennsylvania wants to undercut New York, so they put it at a 4.8% rate, a tariff or a tax on things coming in. Well, but then Massachusetts says, well, we want the business, so we're going to put it at 4.5. So now animosities come in between states, and there's just total problems, okay? Because there is no national policy, because they can't come up with anything because the national policy has problems, okay? Because it's got to be unanimous. Tariffs, as I said, raise sectional tensions. Northerners and Southerners don't like them. They can't come together. Southerners say, we don't want tariffs because if you tariff stuff coming into our country, then when we sell all of our crops that we grow that go outside of the country, they will have a tariff on them as well, and we'll make less money. And the biggest division comes during Daniel Shay's little rebellion that he has in 1786. It's in Massachusetts, and he just says, we're not paying. The farmers, the debtors, aren't going to pay the creditors. Too bad, so sad. Well, there's no law saying that they have to pay it because Congress hasn't come up with any laws. So if there's no repercussions for things that you do, you're going to break the laws. You're going to go in that gray area we talked about, that Mr. Williams doesn't like gray area. It's either black or white. There's got to be a law because now it shows the seriousness of the situation that the poor can stop paying, and now that's going to put in jeopardy the rich people's status in America, and they don't like that. So they figure out they got to come up with something better. And this is where we pick up with our next lecture. So that's it for 170 through 183.